The world dissolved into white noise the moment Major Frank Larson felt the sharp, sickening lurch of the P-51 Mustang's rudder controls, sheared by a sudden, unseen burst of German cannon fire. He was already deep, too deep, over the industrial heartland of Germany, a place known simply among the 8th Air Force pilots as Flak Alley. The mission had been routine until 5 minutes ago, escorting the mighty but vulnerable stream of B-17 flying fortresses aiming for the synthetic fuel plants at Leona. Now the routine was a catastrophe. Frank, flying lead for the 334th Fighter Squadron, had been drawn into a swirling dogfight trying to clear the immediate threat from a screen of Me-109Gs, but a catastrophic misunderstanding of a tactical signal had left his entire flight diving left, while he, momentarily blinded by the high-altitude sun glare reflecting off the clouds, had peeled right. He was alone. Below him, the bomber formation looked like a vast, slow, silver target practice array. And hurtling toward them, a sight that turned Frank's blood to ice, was not a squadron, but a Jagdverband, a German fighter wing. Perhaps 40 or 50 screaming Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs stacked in a terrifying column of destruction. They were moving fast, intent only on slaughtering the B-17s. Frank knew instantly that if he tried to call for help, even if he tried to rejoin his squadron, he would be too late. The air filled with the thick, oily smell of engine exhaust and the ozone tang of high-altitude flight. His breathing hitched, shallow and ragged in the oxygen mask. His mind, trained and hardened by years of combat, made a calculation that was less about tactics and more about pure suicidal necessity. He had to draw them off. He had to be the target. He jammed the throttle forward, ignoring the screaming vibration in the damaged tail section, and dove straight into the teeth of the enemy formation. His plane, the Detroit Dreamer, instantly becoming a solitary silver speck plunging into a black tidal wave of German metal. This wasn't a fight. This was an immediate, high-speed collision course with death. He checked his clock. 14-12 hours. 5 minutes. That was all the time the bombers had before the main attack hit, and 5 minutes was all the time Frank had to live, or to carve an indelible mark into the history of the air war that night. The lead element of the German wave, maybe 8 Me-109s flying in tight echelon, never saw him coming, their eyes fixed on the immense, tempting B-17s above. Frank adjusted his gun sight, his knuckles white against the control stick, waiting for the perfect moment of maximum deflection before he let the 6 mighty .5 caliber machine guns of the Mustang speak their lethal truth. He was entering the storm, alone, betting his entire existence on the slim chance that a single P-51 could derail the focused fury of a German air army. The tactical picture solidified instantly into utter chaos. Frank roared through the German lead element at nearly 400 miles per hour, closing the distance so fast that his brain struggled to process the rapidly expanding silhouettes in his gun sight. He selected the lead Me-109G, a sleek machine painted in standard gray-green camouflage, its canopy gleaming in the afternoon sun. The pilot, likely Hauptmann Klaus Richter, focused entirely on the bombers, never realized the threat was coming from below and behind. Frank squeezed the trigger. The 50 calibers erupted with a deafening, rattling roar that momentarily eclipsed the howl of the Merlin engine. Tracers hammered into the Messerschmitt's engine cowling, tearing through the aluminum like paper. A catastrophic explosion of black smoke and bright orange flame instantly engulfed the German machine. It didn't just fall, it disintegrated, shedding pieces of wing and stabilizer, tumbling end over end toward the earth, the pilot having no chance to bail out. That was kill number 1, clocked at 14:12 and 15 seconds. Frank immediately shifted his focus. He had overshot his target slightly, pulling him into the path of the following 3 109s. They split, 2 diving to evade, the third pulling up sharply into a high G turn, attempting a classic rope-a-dope maneuver. Frank didn't engage the turn. He saw the mistake the Huron pilot made. The pull-up exposed the belly of the aircraft for a split second. He slammed the stick forward, pushing negative Gs, and rolled the Mustang into a tight half roll, catching the climbing 109 perfectly in his sights as they crossed. Another short burst, just 3 seconds of sustained fire, and the German fighter stalled mid-climb, the engine seizing before the wreckage spun away. Kill number 2. The air, already thin and cold, seemed to boil around Frank's canopy. He was now fully immersed, surrounded on all sides by confused but rapidly reacting enemy pilots. The sheer density of the German formation was his greatest danger, but also his unlikely shield. Pilots were desperately trying to avoid collision with one another, while simultaneously figuring out which way the lone American interloper was heading. Frank used the confusion as his cloak. He executed a vertical scissor maneuver, drawing 2 FW-190s into a deadly follow-up. The FWs, heavier and less nimble at this altitude than the Mustang, struggled to match his tight turns. He knew he had to keep moving, keep reversing, and never allow a German pilot to settle in to an aimed shot. The pressure was immense, the G-forces crushing his chest, forcing grunts of effort past his lips. He was fighting less against individual pilots now, and more against the laws of physics and the statistical inevitability of being hit. The German radio chatter, faintly bleeding through his own headset, sounded like a panicked chorus of guttural shouts, confirming that the enemy knew a wolf was loose in their midst. The 5-minute clock was ticking down with terrifying speed. Roughly 60 seconds had elapsed, and Frank had 2 confirmed kills, but the effect on the main German force was minimal. They were still driving toward the B-17s, treating Frank as an annoyance, a rabid dog to be swatted rather than a genuine tactical threat. That mentality was their downfall. Frank pressed his attack, ignoring the growing pain in his ribs from the harness strapping him tight against the sheer gravitational forces of his aggressive maneuvers. He was in a high-speed descending spiral, using the Mustang's superior turn radius at altitude. He singled out an FW-190, identifiable by its stubby, aggressive profile, flying slightly below and to his left. The 190 was positioning for a run on a damaged B-17 struggling to hold formation. Frank dropped his left wing and pulled into a savage turn, the airframe protesting with a low groan. He was fighting with every ounce of physical strength he possessed, hauling the stick back, feeling the blood rush from his head. He blacked out for a split second, a momentary gray haze obscuring his vision, but his muscle memory held the aircraft true. When vision snapped back, the 190 was perfectly framed in his illuminated reticle. This time, he held the trigger for a slightly longer burst, maybe 4 seconds, aiming for the wing root. The 190 shuddered violently, its landing gear dropping uselessly as the hydraulics were ruptured. Then the entire wing tore away from the fuselage, flapping grotesquely before the pilotless wreck plummeted. Kill number 3. He was 3/4 of the way through his ammunition load on the 2 inner guns, the heaviest hitters, and he knew conservation was paramount. He had to make every bullet count. The sheer audacity of the maneuver had drawn the immediate attention of a flight of 4 BF-109s, flying high cover. They converged on him like angry hornets.
Frank executed a swift diving split S, knowing that the momentum would carry him through the convergence point before they could lock on to him. As he leveled out at a lower altitude, he found himself sandwiched between two pairs of Germans. He couldn't afford to get into a turning fight with all four. His focus narrowed. He saw the trailing 109 and the right-hand pair momentarily lose concentration, dropping his nose slightly to check his 6. This was the window. Frank pulled up hard, banking right, throwing a curveball the Germans didn't anticipate. He fired a quick, disciplined burst across the path of the turning 109, aiming for the cockpit. The bullet struck home, puncturing the plexiglass and instantly silencing the enemy's radio transmission. The Messerschmitt pitched forward violently, becoming a dead weight falling from the sky. Kill number 4. Less than 120 seconds had passed since the first shot. Frank tasted copper in his mouth, the result of the extreme G-loading, but the adrenaline was a scorching fire, burning away the pain and the fear, leaving only pure, desperate focus on the next target, the next move, the next burst of deadly fire.
The fight had devolved into a brutal, claustrophobic, close-quarters brawl. Frank wasn't just fighting, he was dancing with death, his Mustang performing maneuvers that seemed impossible for a machine of that size and speed. He was exploiting the P-51's superior high-speed handling, pulling away on the dives, and using the powerful Merlin engine to regain the altitude advantage over the less potent German fighters when needed. After downing the 4th Messerschmitt, the remaining 3 German pilots in that immediate area were now enraged, pressing their attack from separate angles. Frank spotted the threat immediately. The lead 109 was making a high-angle strafing run, aiming to cross Frank's flight path from above and ahead. Frank countered by pushing the nose down and using the massive speed of the dive to open the gap. The German pilot overcompensated, missing Frank by meters, his tracers slicing harmlessly into the thin air where the Mustang had been only a moment before. Frank reversed his turn sharply, pulling the nose up, and used the brief moment of the German's high-speed trajectory to line up a shot on his belly. It was a pure instinct shot, a deflection calculated in fractions of a second, based on speed, angle, and wind. Frank fired. The tracers arched into the 109's oil cooler and lower fuselage. A plume of white coolant streamed out, followed by a thick, dark cloud of engine smoke. The 109 immediately began a slow, desperate glide, pulling out of the fight. Frank couldn't confirm the pilot's fate, but the aircraft was clearly rendered non-operational. In the chaotic tally of air combat, that was a kill. Kill number 5. Before he could even exhale, the second 109 was on his tail, dangerously close. Frank heard the ominous clink, clink, clink of 20-millimeter cannon rounds impacting his armored plate behind the cockpit. He shoved the stick into the corner, executing a violent, snapping corkscrew roll, dumping altitude rapidly. The German pilot, caught off guard by the sudden maneuver, attempted to follow, but his trajectory was too aggressive. Frank reversed the roll mid-turn, forcing the Messerschmitt to cross directly in front of his nose. This was the classic mistake that separated the skilled from the desperate. Frank didn't hesitate. A short, vicious burst aimed at the pilot's side of the fuselage. The German machine erupted in a silent flash of fire, tumbling end over end, the pilot's remains likely consumed instantly. Kill number 6. 210 seconds into the 5-minute deadline, 6 enemy fighters destroyed, and still the primary German formation was reeling, their planned coordinated assault on the bombers shattered by this single silver phantom. Frank's attention shifted immediately.
His instruments were screaming warnings, oil pressure fluctuating, engine temperature climbing due to the heavy punishment he was administering, and the rudder controls vibrating violently, threatening to seize up completely. He knew the plane was barely holding together, but he was not done yet. The desperate fight had transformed Frank's perception of time. The world was now a series of high-speed vignettes. The flashing muzzle of a German cannon, the sudden appearance of a dark enemy silhouette, the smell of cordite in the cockpit. Every action was purely reactive, stripped of intellectual thought, driven by a primal need to survive and protect the slow-moving giants above. He was flying purely on instinct, a deep, honed ability to predict the moves of his opponent fractions of a second before they made them. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard, squinting through the smeared oil and grime on the canopy. 14:16. 4 minutes had evaporated since the first shot, and he was hunting for the 7th kill. The German fighters, realizing they were fighting a maniac, began attempting to regain formation discipline, trying to employ their superior numbers effectively. But the damage had been done. Their assault coordination was broken. They were now fighting piecemeal, and Frank capitalized on the confusion. He spotted a lone FW-190 attempting to loop around and position for a stern attack on the bombers, ignoring Frank's immediate presence, thinking perhaps the American pilot was running low on fuel or ammunition. This German pilot's focus on the easy targets was a fatal error. Frank executed a high-speed yo-yo, bleeding off speed rapidly to tuck directly under the 190's tail. He was now so close he could clearly make out the swastika on the tail fin. This required precise control, fly him in the dirty air of the enemy's prop wash. He lined up his shot perfectly, aiming directly for the engine mounting. He depressed the trigger, but this time only 3 of the 6 guns fired. The 2 inner guns, the heaviest hitters, were empty, having expended their last rounds on the previous kills. The remaining outer guns spat their .5 calibers, tearing into the Focke-Wulf's radial engine. The heavy German fighter didn't explode, but the engine seized violently, throwing massive chunks of shrapnel into the prop blades. The cowling shredded, and the plane instantly began a flat spin. Kill number 7. Achieved exactly 4 minutes and 52 seconds after kill number 1. 7 kills in less than 5 minutes. It was an impossibility, a statistical anomaly of aerial combat achieved through sheer nerve and a desperate refusal to yield. But as the adrenaline began to recede, a chilling thought emerged, one that often haunts men in the deepest throes of combat. Why me? Why did he survive this impossibility, while 7 other young men, pilots just like him, now tumbled in burning wrecks toward the hard earth below? Was it skill, fate, or simply brutal, meaningless luck? Every man fighting this war wrestled with the arbitrary nature of survival. If you are watching this, if you are listening to the scream of the engine and the rattle of the guns, what do you believe separates the hero who survives from the hero who falls? Is it the depth of courage, the technical mastery, or just the blind, unfeeling hand of fortune? Share your thoughts below, because the answer is the central, terrifying mystery of this war. Frank didn't have time to dwell on that mystery, however. The clock had run out. The impossible task was complete, but he was still surrounded, and now the Germans were focusing all their remaining fury directly on him.
The moment Frank broke contact with the 7th kill, the nature of the engagement shifted from offensive dogfighting to desperate, sustained evasion. The main body of the German formation, perhaps 20 fighters still operational, finally grasped the tactical reality. This single P-51 had crippled their assault and saved the bomber formation. Their initial panic morphed into cold, focused rage. They formed up, not in an attacking wave, but in defensive circles, attempting to trap Frank in the center. Frank pushed the Mustang to its absolute limits, utilizing the incredible speed potential of the design. He dove towards the cloud deck far below, gaining critical speed, while the heavier Focke-Wulf struggled to keep up. Two 109s, flying wing to wing, pursued him in a desperate tail chase. Frank glanced quickly at his rearview mirror. The tracers were long, bright lines of light, missing him by mere yards. He yanked the stick, initiating a high G turn to the right, followed immediately by a rapid rudder reversal, throwing the plane into a skidding slip. This unexpected maneuver forced the lead plane to overshoot, exposing its broadside for a fleeting instant. Frank pressed the trigger, letting the three remaining guns chatter. The fire was sporadic, less concentrated than before, but sufficient. He saw sparks fly off the 109's canopy before the plane veered violently, pulling up sharply in an uncontrolled climb. He couldn't confirm the kill, but the threat was neutralized. The pursuit temporarily broken, Frank leveled off just above the dense gray undercast, using the thick cloud layer as his momentary sanctuary. The silence in the cockpit was shocking after the deafening roar of the close-quarters fighting. The frantic ringing in his ears, the sharp, metallic taste of fear, and the physical exhaustion were overwhelming. He took a single, deep breath of the bottled oxygen, trying to calm his racing heart. His flight suit was drenched in sweat, despite the freezing temperatures outside. He looked at the instrument panel. His fuel indicator was worryingly low, a consequence of the aggressive, full-throttle maneuvers. More concerning was the engine temperature, which was now flashing a continuous red warning. He had pushed the Merlin engine past its operational limits, and it was screaming in protest. He knew that any further sustained high-G combat would tear the remaining controls apart or cause a catastrophic engine failure. The fight, the incredible, suicidal 5-minute rush, was over. Now the grueling, terrifying retreat began, a 300-mile sprint across hostile skies, back toward Allied lines, nursing a wounded aircraft that had just performed the impossible. The journey home was perhaps more psychologically draining than the dogfight itself. In combat, the brain is flooded with endorphins and adrenaline, focusing solely on the immediate threat. Now, alone above the enemy landscape, the overwhelming reality of the damage and the vulnerability crashed over Frank. Every shudder of the damaged rudder, every fluctuation in engine RPM felt like a direct threat. He stayed low, utilizing the valleys and terrain features below the scattered cloud cover to avoid detection by German flak positions and opportunistic airfield patrols. The silence was occasionally punctuated by the chilling crack of anti-aircraft fire exploding hundreds of feet beneath him, their black puffs of smoke marking dangerous zones he had to bypass. He had to keep the RPM low, sacrificing speed for engine longevity, attempting to baby the powerful Merlin engine that had just carried him through hell. He flew east, then gradually angled north, following the pre-planned escape corridors used by the 8th Air Force. His radio remained silent. He didn't dare transmit, fearing giving away his position. He was truly isolated, a lone hunter limping back to the pack. He ran through a mental checklist of the damage. Control surfaces were sluggish, requiring disproportionate pressure on the stick to make minor adjustments.
The left wing had several visible holes from the cannon fire he had sustained earlier, and the armored plating behind his seat was heavily scored. He was miraculously unharmed, a testament to the robust design of the Mustang and pure, unadulterated luck. As he crossed the Rhine River, the mental tension ratcheted up another notch. This area was heavily patrolled by German training units and auxiliary flak sites. It was the place where many weary, damaged Allied aircraft met their end, not in heroic combat, but in a mundane, demoralizing ambush. He spotted a flash of movement below, a small German airfield. He instantly shoved the stick forward, dropping to treetop level, flying so low that the leaves whipped past his canopy. He could feel the tremendous drag of the low-altitude air, but the terrain masking offered temporary safety. The sheer length of the flight forced him to confront the immense energy he had expended in those 5 minutes of chaos. His arms were shaking uncontrollably, his shoulders ached, and a throbbing headache hammered behind his eyes. He realized he hadn't eaten or drunk anything since dawn. The exhaustion was a heavy, physical weight, threatening to pull him down into sleep, a sleep that would certainly end in disaster. He forced himself to stay hyper-alert, his eyes darting across the horizon, seeking the telltale sign of an approaching fighter, knowing that if a fresh German squadron found him now, he would have no reserve of energy or ammunition left to fight back. All he could do was run, endure, and pray that the battered Detroit Dreamer would hold together long enough to see the English Channel.
The crossing of the Channel was agonizingly slow. The engine, protesting loudly now with a consistent rhythmic knocking, sounded like a death knell in the cockpit. Frank nursed the plane through the final 100 miles, the sea below looking vast and unforgiving, ready to swallow him whole should the engine seize. Finally, through the haze and the gathering evening gloom, the familiar low-lying coast of East Anglia appeared. It was the most beautiful sight he had ever witnessed. He called in his approach, his voice croaking over the radio, barely audible even to himself. He didn't offer details, just his call sign and the word emergency. He knew the field would be alerted immediately. As he approached the airfield boundary, he lowered his wheels manually, the hydraulic system being partially damaged. The gear dropped with a grinding, sickening sound, locking into place. He lined up for the landing, fighting the asymmetric drag caused by the damaged left wing and the unstable rudder. The landing was hard, bouncing violently once before settling onto the tarmac. He taxied slowly off the main runway, the engine finally coughing and dying with a pathetic shudder as he cut the magnetos. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Ground crew and medics rushed the plane, their faces etched with concern and curiosity. Frank didn't wait for the ladder. He threw open the canopy and stumbled out onto the wing, his legs immediately buckling beneath him. He was caught by 2 crew chiefs who gently lowered him to the ground. He refused medical attention immediately, pointing only to the plane. "Get the gun camera film. Get the maintenance report on the 6 inner .50s. We need the evidence," he managed to whisper, the words dry and rough. The ground crew immediately began their inspection. What they found wasn't just battle damage, it was carnage. The Detroit Dreamer looked less like a fighter and more like a sieve that had been violently tortured. There were 20-millimeter cannon holes in the trailing edge of the wing. The scores on the armored plating were deep, and the rudder cables were hanging loose, frayed by near total severance. But it was the inspection of the guns that solidified the claim. The logs showed the 4 inner guns, the ones used for the close-range maximum damage passes, were completely empty, having fired their total load. The 2 outer guns had only a few hundred rounds remaining. The real proof, however, was in the gun camera film, a tiny reel of celluloid history that held the visual record of those 5 impossible minutes. Frank was taken straight to the base commander's office, exhausted and shaking, while the evidence was rushed into development. The mood among the maintenance men shifted from professional assessment to stunned disbelief as they began tallying the number of hits and the almost miraculous level of damage the plane had sustained while remaining airborne. The debriefing was not a celebratory affair. It was an interrogation. Major Frank Larson sat across from the intelligence officer, Colonel Davies, a man known for his meticulous skepticism under the harsh glare of a single desk lamp. Davies reviewed the initial combat report Frank had dictated, a clinical summary of the encounter that simply listed the time, place, and the number of enemy aircraft destroyed. 7. Davies leaned back, pushing his glasses up his nose, his expression betraying nothing. 7, Major. In 5 minutes. You realize, of course, that we will need absolute, undeniable confirmation. This is unprecedented. You were alone, separated from the 334th? Frank, too tired to feel indignant, simply nodded. I understand, Colonel. The gun camera film is the evidence. I wouldn't expect you to take my word alone. The pressure was immense. In the ETO, claims of 3 or 4 kills in a single sortie were accepted with relative ease. But 7 in less than 5 minutes against a superior force was bordering on the unbelievable, the kind of claim usually reserved for propaganda leaflets. If the film didn't back him up, Frank's reputation, perhaps even his sanity, would be questioned. Hours crawled by while they waited for the film to be developed, reviewed frame by frame, and matched against the combat map. Finally, close to midnight, the doors opened and the photographic intelligence officer, Lieutenant Henderson, walked in, pale and speechless, carrying the still damp reel. He placed the spool on the projector. The small group of officers gathered in silence. What they witnessed was the raw, brutal truth of Frank's ordeal. The first Maze 109 dissolved in smoke and flame. The second tumbled after a high G pass. The third shed its wing. Each kill was captured with chilling clarity, the rapid-fire succession blurring the targets together. Henderson operated the projector slowly, pausing the film on each wreck, counting the frames, verifying the elapsed time between bursts. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with the smell of developing chemicals. When Henderson finally stopped the projector after the 7th confirmed enemy aircraft, the silence was broken by the sharp intake of breath from Colonel Davies. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "My God," he murmured, leaning forward. "It's all there. 7 confirmed visual destructions, all within 4 minutes and 52 seconds of engagement time. Major Larson, I apologize for my skepticism. You didn't just break up their attack, you annihilated it single-handedly." The official report was drafted immediately, detailing the extraordinary achievement. But even among the reporting officers, there was a sense that this story was too extreme, too cinematic to be fully embraced by the wider public. It was the kind of event that belonged to legend, not official records. Yet the evidence was undeniable.
The Detroit dreamer had returned a battered hero, and Frank Larson had achieved the statistically impossible.
The official confirmation of 7 kills in less than 5 minutes rocketed Major Frank Larson into the stratosphere of American aces, placing him among the elite few who achieved such staggering numbers in a single concentrated engagement. Yet paradoxically, his story never quite received the recognition it deserved. The sheer magnitude of the Western Front war machine meant that extraordinary feats often became footnotes in the relentless march of daily operational summaries. Other massive missions followed, other heroes emerged, and the collective memory of the press and the public struggled to keep pace with the constant stream of sacrifice. Frank was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, a high honor, but he never sought the limelight. He was a quiet, unassuming man, profoundly affected by the intensity of that 5-minute crucible. He never bragged about the achievement. In fact, he often downplayed it, attributing his survival not to his skill, but to the performance of the P-51 Mustang, and perhaps most pointedly, to the blind luck that spared him when 7 others were not so fortunate. He felt the weight of those 7 lives, young men who were simply doing their duty, just as he was. That was the hidden cost of his heroism. The terrifying realization that success in war is often built upon the ashes of near-simultaneous failure. His gun camera film became required viewing for new fighter pilots, a masterclass in deflection shooting, energy management, and high-G maneuvering under extreme duress. They studied the weave, the snap rolls, and the sudden reversals that Frank employed to break the German formation. But the film couldn't capture the heart-stopping terror, the screaming engine, or the sheer adrenaline that allowed a human being to process and react to threats at that impossible speed. Frank flew only a handful more missions before the end of the war. His nerves strained to its limit, the memory of those 5 minutes permanently etched onto his consciousness. He returned home to a quiet life, his legend confined mostly to the pilots of the 334th Squadron who had seen the damage to his plane and reviewed the film. They knew the truth, that on one desperate afternoon over the heart of Germany, a single American pilot defied the odds, stared down 40 enemy fighters, and saved 100 bombers from certain destruction. He walked away, carrying his incredible secret with him, a testament to the ferocious courage and unparalleled skill of the men who secured Allied dominance in the skies. His story, though perhaps forgotten by history books, lives on here, a glowing example of the true, breathtaking reality of aerial combat. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest legends are not the ones who shouted the loudest, but the ones who fought the hardest and then returned to silence. It's a legacy that deserves to be remembered, cherished, and honored for the impossible bravery it represents. Thank you for joining us in uncovering this unbelievable moment in the history of the 8th Air Force. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to WWII Lore and hit that notification bell so you don't miss another dive into the unbelievable history of the Air War.